Close your eyes and settle in. Tonight's story is called, The Slip and Slide in the Woods. My name is Frank and I quit, effective immediately. I am no longer willing to pretend that what happens in this place is normal, because it is not. This place is sick. If there is a God, then he turns a blind eye to what happens here. Instead of writing a typical resignation letter, I am simply going to document what happened yesterday. I am certain that anyone who reads this will either understand why I am leaving or think I am insane. I will sign this statement. I will swear to it under oath if anyone asks. What follows is true, recalled to the best of my ability. For those who do not know me, I am a search and rescue officer with the National Park Service. Up until about a week ago, I loved my job. The wilderness brings with it a lot of strange happenings, and I have heard more than my fair share of strange stories. The people of Glen Haven are deeply superstitious. They always have been. But even with the rumors and campfire legends, I always found the job extremely rewarding. Out here you learn to ground yourself in reality. People get lost and they panic. The woods are bigger than most people realize, and fear can make the imagination run wild. Sometimes you have to remind yourself that the boogeyman is not real. There are no werewolves roaming the forests. There is no witch trapped in some forgotten well making clothing out of skin. And a random staircase in the woods is just that. A staircase. That's what I used to believe. Good night. Good night. A few weeks ago my colleague and friend Josh disappeared from the job. Just stopped showing up. Josh had been my partner for years. We worked every kind of call together. Lost hikers, injured climbers, the occasional recovery that none of us liked to talk about afterward. He was good at the job. Calm under pressure, sharp instincts, the kind of guy who could pick up on small details that others might miss. I knew he had been thinking about leaving. We had sat down together a few times and worked on his resume. He talked about moving somewhere quieter. Somewhere without the constant search calls and the long nights. I figured eventually he would put in his notice like anyone else. But that is not what happened. Good night. Good night. Josh did not resign. He did not transfer. He did not say goodbye. Good night. Good night. One day he was here, and the next day he was simply gone. Good night. Good night. The last time I saw him was the morning of his final shift. He looked tired, the kind of tired that sleep does not fix. When I asked him what was wrong, he just said he had not been sleeping well. I left early that day. Now I wish I hadn't. Something about the woods had been bothering him for a while. I assumed he meant the stories the locals like to tell. The usual nonsense. I tried calling him that evening after he failed to show up for a shift. It went straight to voicemail. I sent a message asking if everything was all right. No response. A day passed. Then another. Eventually I stopped calling. Maybe I reminded him too much of the job. Maybe he just wanted to leave this place behind completely. I guess it does not really matter now. Since Josh left, no one has replaced him. It has just been me working the long shifts. Me and Gus. Gus has been here longer than I have. He was already part of the team when I started years ago. He is old now. His muzzle has gone gray and he moves a little slower when he first gets up. But when it comes to finding a scent, there is nothing slow about him. Gus is the best tracker I have ever seen. We have had kids go missing out here before. Sometimes the only thing left behind is a backpack or a jacket. You let Gus smell it and he will put his nose to the ground like someone flipped a switch. Then he just goes. Straight through brush, across streams, up hills, like he has a map running in his head. More than once it has felt like watching a GPS find its route. Sometimes I know someone's going to be fine by how quick he moves. Gus has saved a lot of people. More than me. Good night. Good night. Yesterday evening started like any other. I was sitting in the ranger station going through paperwork when there was a knock at the door. I got up and opened it. A woman came stumbling inside. It was around 6 in the evening. She looked like she had run the whole way there. Her breath came in sharp, uneven bursts and tears were streaming down her face. She told me her son was missing. Good night. Good night. They had been out walking one of the upper trails together. 1 minute he had been right beside her. The next minute he was gone. Just like that. Poof. Good night. Good night. I did my best to calm her down. Panic spreads fast in situations like that, and if you let it take over you lose precious time. I sat her down at the small desk near the front window and told her we would do everything we could to find him. Then I reached for the radio and tried to contact command. Good night. Good night. All I got back was static. Good night. Good night. That part was not unusual. The equipment around here is older than it should be. Definitely breaking multiple codes. Please somebody make note of that for whatever poor fools take my job. I have been complaining about it for years. The radios crackle, the batteries die quick, and half the time you are lucky if anyone hears you at all. I tried again. Good night. Good night. More static. No phone signal either. Good night. Good night. While I spoke with the mother, Gus stood quietly near a front window. His ears were pointed toward the tree line, staring out into the woods as the sun slipped lower behind the hills. The light was fading fast and the forest was already starting to sink into shadow. I asked her the usual questions while she tried to steady herself enough to answer. She didn't talk much. Her son was 6 years old. Good night. Good night. She had last seen him about 2 hours earlier. Good night. Good night. That might sound like a long time, but the place she described was near the highest point of our trail systems. We have 6 trail runs and the topography changes greatly. The hike down from there takes a while even for us. I figured she must have searched as much as she could on her own before panic finally pushed her to run for help. Gus did not react to her the way he usually does. Good night. Good night. Normally he walks right up to people. Gives them a gentle nudge or sits beside them like he understands they are scared. Even a simple wagging tail can calm someone down when they are in a situation like that. But tonight for whatever reason, he was not in the mood. Good night. Good night. He kept staring into the woods. Good night. Good night. The mother reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a glove. Blue and knitted. I felt like I recognized it, maybe they sold it at the local Walmart or something. She told me it belonged to her son. Good night. Good night. I took the glove and knelt down beside Gus, holding it out for him to smell. His nose twitched as he caught the scent. He began to move towards the woods, so I knew we had a shot at getting the kid. I told the mother she should stay at the station while I went to search. That is the normal procedure. Missing person cases can get chaotic, and having family members wandering the trails usually makes things worse. But she begged me to let her come. Good night. Good night. She said she could not just sit there and wait. Good night. Good night. And looking at her, hearing the desperation in her voice, I realized I did not have it in me to tell her no. So I grabbed my flashlight, clipped the radio to my belt, and stepped out into the darkening woods with Gus leading the way. The mother calmed down a little once we started walking. That happens sometimes. Movement gives people something to focus on. I kept the conversation to a minimum. I have never been good at small talk anyway, and in situations like that it usually does more harm than good. People either want silence or answers. The trail was already getting dark beneath the trees. The sun had dipped low enough that the forest swallowed most of the remaining light. My flashlight cut a narrow tunnel through the brush ahead of us while Gus trotted a few yards in front, nose low to the ground. We had been walking for maybe 15 minutes when I noticed a beam of light flickering through the trees ahead of us. Another flashlight. Good night. Good night. At first it was just a faint glow between the trunks, moving slowly along the trail toward us. I stopped. Good night. Good night. The mother stayed close to me. Good night. Good night. I turned toward her. Good night. Good night. Does your son have a flashlight with him? Good night. Good night. She shook her head immediately. Good night. Good night. No. Good night. Good night. We kept walking toward the light. Good night. Good night. A minute later the beam rounded the bend in the trail and its owner came into view. It was one of the regular hikers. I had seen her on the trails dozens of times over the years. Her name was Amanda, I think. Good night. Good night. The type you see out here all the time. Expensive Patagonia jacket, fresh pair of Hoka trail runners, one of those slim hiking backpacks that probably costs more than the radio sitting on my belt. Before I could even say hello, Gus bolted ahead of us. Good night. Good night. For a moment he looked 10 years younger. His tail wagged wildly as he bounded up to her, jumping and circling like an overexcited puppy. Amanda laughed and crouched down to greet him. Good night. Good night. Well, hey there, Gus, she said, scratching behind his ears. Good night. Good night. I stepped closer and lifted my flashlight slightly so she could see my face. Good night. Good night. Evening, Amanda. Good night. Good night. She looked up at me, still smiling. Good night. Good night. Evening, Frank. Good night. Good night. I asked her if she had seen anyone else out on the trails that evening. Anyone at all. She shook her head. Good night. Good night. No, just you now. Is everything all right? Good night. Good night. I explained that a young boy had wandered off the trail and we were trying to track him down before it got any darker. As I spoke I glanced back toward the mother, half expecting her to add something. Maybe describe her son, maybe call his name. But she said nothing. Good night. Good night. She stood a few steps behind me with her head lowered, staring at the ground. Good night. Good night. Grief can hit people in strange ways. Some cry. Some panic. Some shut down completely. She was shutting down. Amanda and I spoke for another moment or two. She asked if there was anything she could do to help. Normally I would have told her to head back to the trailhead and stay clear of the search area. But with the radio acting up and no service out here, I needed someone who could reach the outside world. I told her that once she drove far enough from the park she should call 911. Explain that we had a missing child and tell them which trail we are on. She nodded immediately. Good night. Good night. I thanked her and wished her a safe walk back. Good night. Good night. She started down the trail toward the valley. Good night. Good night. Gus watched her go for a moment, tail still wagging. Good night. Good night. Then he slowly walked back to my side. Good night. Good night. For some reason I could not quite explain, I found myself watching Amanda's flashlight a little longer than I needed to as it disappeared between the trees. Something about the encounter didn't feel right. Good night. Good night. At the time I told myself it was just the situation. Missing kids have a way of putting everyone on edge. We continued upward along the trail. As we climbed, the temperature dropped quickly and the air began to feel thinner. The forest grew quieter the higher we went. Even the wind seemed to disappear up there. The mother had not spoken in a long time. Good night. Good night. After a while I turned and asked if she needed water or wanted to stop and rest for a minute. She stood with her arms pulled tightly against her chest, as if trying to keep warm. Her long blonde hair hung forward and covered most of her face. When I asked the question, she simply shook her head. She never looked up. "Good night. Good night." Ahead of us Gus barked once, sharp and alert. He had wandered farther up the trail than usual. That normally meant the scent was strong and he was confident about where he was going. We kept moving. "Good night. Good night." Near the top of the trail we reached a sharp bend and turned left. The trail narrowed there before fading out completely. Beyond that point there was no official path. Just rough ground, loose rock, and low brush. Gus did not hesitate. He pushed straight into the trees. "Good night. Good night." I turned back toward the mother and told her she should wait on the trail. It was safer there and easier for the search teams to find her later. She did not answer. "Good night. Good night." She did not refuse either. "Good night. Good night." She simply followed. "Good night. Good night." Up close I could see how pale she looked in the beam of my flashlight. Her skin almost seemed gray in the cold light. She looked freezing, but she never complained. After a few minutes of walking I reached into my pocket and pulled out the glove the woman had given me. Gus had already taken the scent and moved ahead, but I found myself turning the glove over in my hand as we walked. I could tell something wasn't right. It felt strange. "Good night. Good night." I rubbed the fabric between my fingers as I walked, trying to place the feeling. It felt bigger than I expected. I told myself it was nothing at the time, but it's clear now that the glove was adult size. It would have fit me, so it certainly wouldn't work for a 6-year-old. Gus barked from somewhere ahead on the trail, sharp and excited. "Good night. Good night." I picked up the pace to follow him, letting the thought slip from my mind, and we pushed deeper into the woods until the darkness around us became nearly total. My flashlight was the only thing cutting through it. Then I heard it. "Good night. Good night." At first it was faint. Just a soft trickling sound somewhere ahead of us. Water maybe. A small stream running down the mountain. But as I followed Gus the sound grew louder. "Good night. Good night." Soon it was unmistakable. "Good night. Good night." Running water. "Good night. Good night." A moment later the trees opened up and the source revealed itself in the beam of my light. I stopped dead in my tracks. "Good night. Good night." Because sitting at the top of that mountain was a slip and slide. "Good night. Good night." A fucking slip and slide. "Good night. Good night." Not some cheap plastic sheet either. This thing was huge. It had a large inflatable entrance at the top, a bright archway in yellow and red like something from a carnival. You'd half expect to see clowns or a Ferris wheel to be nearby. Water ran steadily down the plastic surface, glistening under the flashlight beam as it flowed downhill. It looked incredibly out of place. "Good night. Good night." The water kept running as if it was hooked up to some secret utility line. "Good night. Good night." I felt sick the moment I saw it. "Good night. Good night." If a 6-year-old boy had wandered up here and found that thing, there was no chance in hell he had ignored it. I turned to say something to the mother. "Good night. Good night." She was gone. "Good night. Good night." 1 second she had been behind me, like right behind me. On a few occasions she was so close I could feel her breath. The next there was nothing but darkness between the trees. I spun around and called out for her. "Good night. Good night." No answer. "Good night. Good night." I called again, louder this time. "Good night. Good night." Still nothing. "Good night. Good night." The forest swallowed my voice. Good night. Good night. Gus stood a few feet away staring toward the slide. Good night. Good night. Slowly I walked toward the inflatable archway. Good night. Good night. The closer I got, the stranger it felt. The ground beneath my feet sloped sharply downward and I realized just how steep the hillside really was. The slide began flat enough near the entrance, but within a few feet it dropped away into a steep slope. At least 45 degrees. Good night. Good night. Gus suddenly stopped behind me. Good night. Good night. Completely stopped. Good night. Good night. I turned and called for him to come along, but he would not move. He planted his feet in the dirt and refused to step any closer. It reminded me of a video game character hitting the invisible boundary of the map. Come on, Gus. Good night. Good night. He did not budge. Good night. Good night. That alone was enough to make me uneasy. Gus had followed me into every kind of terrain imaginable over the years. He was not the type to hesitate. But something about that slide made him refuse, and as it turns out, his instincts were on point. As I stepped closer to the archway I began to feel strange. Good night. Good night. Lightheaded. Good night. Good night. Almost like I had been drinking. Good night. Good night. My thoughts felt slow and distant, like they were drifting away from me. Good night. Good night. And then a thought appeared in my head. Good night. Good night. I should try the slide. Good night. Good night. It felt completely reasonable. You know, like when you try to explain a dream and it sounds insane, but it felt normal at the time. I took off my coat and dropped it on the ground. Then I stepped out of my boots. I even caught myself wondering what the best way to go down would be. Head first on my stomach or sliding down on my back. The idea seemed fun. Good night. Good night. Exciting. Good night. Good night. Gus began barking wildly behind me. Good night. Good night. His bark was sharp and frantic now, nothing like the friendly noise he made earlier with Amanda. I stepped forward toward the plastic surface, ready to launch myself down. Good night. Good night. Then something slammed into my leg. Good night. Good night. A burst of sharp pain shot through my ankle and I looked down to see Gus clamped onto it with his teeth. His jaws were locked tight around my leg. I panicked. Good night. Good night. Without thinking I swung my arm and hit him across the head. Good night. Good night. He let go. Good night. Good night. The force of the movement threw me off balance and I stumbled sideways. Good night. Good night. My foot slipped in the wet grass beside the slide. Good night. Good night. Then suddenly I was falling. Good night. Good night. I rolled down the hillside beside the plastic surface, picking up speed immediately. The slope was even steeper than it looked from the top. Dirt and rocks tore at my clothes as gravity dragged me downward. In seconds I realized just how much danger I was in. Good night. Good night. Luckily, and also unluckily, I slammed into a tree at what felt like 60 miles an hour. The impact knocked the air out of my lungs and I felt something break in my ribs or maybe my arm. Pain exploded through my body and I collapsed at the base of the trunk. When I finally managed to lift my head and look forward, my stomach dropped. Good night. Good night. About 3 feet past that tree the ground simply ended. Good night. Good night. A sheer cliff. Good night. Good night. At least 100 feet straight down to boulders and rocks. Good night. Good night. If that tree had not been there, I would not be writing this. Good night. Good night. I looked down into the darkness below the cliff and saw something among the rocks. At first it was just a shape. Something hunched over and curled in on itself between a cluster of boulders. My heart jumped. Good night. Good night. Hey. Hey kid, are you all right? Good night. Good night. The words felt stupid the moment they left my mouth. A fall like that would have killed almost anyone, let alone a 6-year-old. Still, you say things like that automatically in this job. You say them because sometimes you get lucky, but not this time. No one answered. Good night. Good night. I forced myself to my feet and looked for a way down. The cliff was steep but not completely vertical. There was a narrow path of broken stone and dirt that curved along the face of the drop. If I was careful I might be able to reach the rocks below. Good night. Good night. Maybe the kid had survived. Maybe he was unconscious. Maybe there was still something I could do. I had to try. So I started down. Good night. Good night. Every step hurt. My ribs screamed every time I tried to breathe too deeply. I could feel blood running down my side and soaking into my shirt. More than once my vision blurred and I had to stop and steady myself against the rock. But I kept moving. Good night. Good night. It took a long time to reach the bottom. By the time I finally stepped onto the loose stones surrounding the cluster of boulders, my legs were shaking and my lungs felt like they were filled with fire. Only then did I realize Gus was gone. Good night. Good night. I had not seen him since I fell. Good night. Good night. I told myself he must have stayed at the top of the slope. Dogs are smart about cliffs. Smarter than people sometimes. I hoped he was all right. I hoped he forgave me for striking him. Good night. Good night. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness as I slowly approached the body. Good night. Good night. Over the years I have seen things that would turn most people's stomachs. Recoveries that lasted days in the heat. Bodies that had been in the wilderness long enough for the forest to start reclaiming them. But nothing prepared me for what I saw lying between those rocks. Good night. Good night. It wasn't a child. Good night. Good night. It was Josh. Good night. Good night. For a moment my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. The image in front of me just did not make sense. Josh lay twisted against the stones, his body broken and half collapsed in on itself. He looked impossibly thin. Gaunt. Like the flesh had shrunk tight against his bones. His skin was gray beneath the dried blood. Good night. Good night. His jaw hung wide open at an unnatural angle, clearly shattered in the fall. The smell hit me a second later. Rot and old blood and the sour stink of something that had been lying out in the wild for too long. It was clear that animals had been feeding on him. Good night. Good night. One of his legs was gone entirely. Torn and taken. His arms were stretched out in front of him, rigid and twisted as if he had hit the rocks head first with his hands reaching out to catch himself. Weeks. Good night. Good night. That was my first thought. Good night. Good night. He had been here for weeks. Good night. Good night. The forest had been slowly taking him apart piece by piece while the rest of us wondered why he stopped showing up for work. I sank to my knees beside him. Good night. Good night. And that was when I saw it. Good night. Good night. One glove. Good night. Good night. Still clinging to his hand. Good night. Good night. One. Good night. Good night. My stomach turned cold. Good night. Good night. Slowly I reached into my pocket and pulled out the glove the woman had given me earlier. For a moment I just stared at the two of them. Good night. Good night. Then I held mine beside the one on Josh's hand. Good night. Good night. They matched perfectly. Good night. Good night. Same color. Same stitching. Same worn thread at the wrist. Good night. Good night. My hands began to shake. Good night. Good night. I looked back up toward the cliff above me. Good night. Good night. Toward the slide. Good night. Good night. And for just a second, in the faint glow of my flashlight reflecting off the wet plastic above, I saw a figure standing there. Tall. Pale. Good night. Good night. A woman. Good night. Good night. She was looking down at me. Good night. Good night. Her face was hidden in the darkness. Good night. Good night. The mother. Good night. Good night. The moment my light shifted toward her, she stepped backward and disappeared into the night. I shouted after her. Words I won't write down. Good night. Good night. The forest swallowed my voice. Good night. Good night. Then I looked back down at Josh. Good night. Good night. And the reality of what had happened finally hit me. Good night. Good night. Josh had not quit. Good night. Good night. He had been taken out here. Good night. Good night. Tricked the same way I had been. Good night. Good night. Led to the slide. I had never been more grateful for Gus. Good night. Good night. I sat there beside what was left of my friend and started to cry. Good night. Good night. Josh did not deserve to die like that. Good night. Good night. Over the next few agonizing hours I managed to drag myself back down the mountain and make it to the ranger station. Every step felt like I was being stabbed in the ribs. By the time I reached the door I was barely conscious. There were police waiting for me. Good night. Good night. Amanda had done exactly what I asked. She must have found a signal and called it in, because the lot was full of patrol cars when I stumbled out of the woods. They sat me down and started first aid right there on the floor of the station. Someone wrapped my side, someone else shined a light in my eyes. All the while they kept asking questions. What happened? Good night. Good night. Where the body was. Good night. Good night. What I had seen. Good night. Good night. I told them everything. Good night. Good night. I told them about the boy. I told them about the trail. I told them about the slip and slide sitting at the top of the mountain like some kind of bullshit from a cartoon. Some of them glanced at each other. I know they think I'm mad, but they want when they go out there. I told them about the woman. Good night. Good night. The woman who led me out there. Good night. Good night. The one who gave me the glove. Good night. Good night. The one who stood at the top of that slide and watched me fall. Good night. Good night. They had me repeat the story again and again that night. Every detail. Every step. Some of the officers knew Josh personally, so when I told them what I had found at the bottom of the cliff the room went quiet. While relaying the story a thought came to mind. Good night. Good night. We have cameras. Good night. Good night. The ranger station has security cameras covering every entrance and the parking lot. We could review them to get an image of the women. I remember feeling angry while we waited for the footage to load. Angry and hopeful at the same time. I wanted to see her face. I wanted her punished. The officer running the computer rewound the footage to earlier that evening. Good night. Good night. Then we watched. Good night. Good night. I walked up to the front door and opened it. Good night. Good night. I held my hand out to beckon someone inside, but no one came inside. Good night. Good night. My neck rotated like I was watching someone walk through the door, but no one did. I was alone. Good night. Good night. I stopped in the middle of the room and began speaking. Good night. Good night. The camera showed me holding the door open for empty air. Good night. Good night. Gesturing toward the chair for someone to sit down. Good night. Good night. Nodding as if someone was answering my questions. Good night. Good night. At one point I even reached out my hand for a handshake. Good night. Good night. Waiting for someone who was never there to take it. Good night. Good night. The officers in the room didn't say anything for a long time. Good night. Good night. They just kept watching the footage as I spoke to a person that did not exist. Gus stood by the window looking out into the night. Then me and Gus opened the door and left the room. We rewound the tape and watched multiple times. Good night. Good night. Nobody spoke. Good night. Good night. The silence was deafening. Good night. Good night. My name is Frank and I quit, effective immediately. Good night. Good night. And that is where our story rests for tonight. Let your thoughts drift away, slow and easy. Good night. Sleep well.